Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for EDC CrossCat webinar series on leveraging digital vision technology for enterprise and industrial applications. My name is Pierluigi Buonicore, and I'm the Global Trade Director for Advanced Technology. And I also have on the line with me today my colleague Sean Fan. He's the Global Trade Director for Industrial Technology and Advanced Manufacturing here at EDC. Our guest speaker today is Ronnie Serga, co-founder and CEO at VR Vision. Will provide an overview of their AR and VR immersive training solutions. Over to you, Ronnie.
Thank you, Pierluigi. So a little bit about myself. My name is Ronnie Serga. I'm the co-founder and CEO here at VR Vision Group. We are a Canadian and Toronto-based augmented and virtual reality company. Also, our clients can be found all over the world. Most of ours are focused here in North and hopefully South America in the future, with quite a few in Asia and Europe. On to the next slide, please, Alicia. So about our company, we focus in quite a few areas, but fundamentally, they just come down to two areas. So one is virtual reality, and the second one is augmented reality. Some of this does have overlap with applications like web and mobile applications, as well as 360 3D development that can sometimes carry over for both devices. On to the next, Alicia, please. VR Vision right now ranks #2 in the world on Clutch, which is a third-party evaluation software based on client reviews. Now, the reason we rank so high and we compete with some of the biggest companies in the world is because of our high focus in virtual and augmented reality, which is basically all that the company does. So even though we have companies that are larger than us out there, we have the highest focus, and that what helps us stay so high. That surpasses us right now is Nexus, and that's a company that's owned by Google. Thanks, Alicia. On to the next. Now, an introduction to the presentation today. We're going to be focusing on measuring VR training. Some of this can carry over to AR as well. So we're going to try and understand things like what it takes to develop really effective training systems that are interactive, engaging, but also so that we're able to get some measurable ROI around it, as well as understand how our team members and employees are using the system and its effectiveness. On to the next, please. Now, before we jump into that, it is always good to sort of explain the best for virtual reality and augmented reality, as they can sometimes seem to overlap. They both fall under the umbrella of XR, for training and assisted work, and they both help to standardize processes and also cut costs. But the way they go about it is a little bit different. For example, with virtual reality, it's something that's mainly used in a classroom, and it's used as a tool to immersively train employees in a safe way, especially if they're being trained in tasks that are difficult to replicate in the classroom or difficult to access the training centers. While AR is something that happens while the employees are working. So this is typically a wearable, and we've done some mobile stuff. This is usually hands-free, and this device will help the employee while they're in the field, while they're doing their job. So one, VR trains them on how to do their work, and AR assists them while they're doing it. And if we can go to the next. Now, a great way to gather information about how people are interacting with this technology is to look at information like viewpoint and object tracking. So there's a difference between viewpoint and object tracking. Viewpoint is something that can sometimes be before some team members go into, let's say, a visual inspection of something. Now, while we're doing this in VR, we're tracking where they're looking at. So are they looking at the right points? And some of these can be done overtly, we can show it openly, are inspecting something while they are in the system, or some of it can be hidden if we're using it for evaluation purposes. For example, did they look up to see that there's an inspection that needs to be done visually, and how much time did they spend doing it? While the second one is object tracking. So this is more like using tools. Are they using a screwdriver? Are they using a multimeter, a wrench, and how long they're using it for? And that carries over into interactions and object manipulation. So now we're using our controllers and our hands to basically manipulate and interact with these virtual objects that are copies of the real world scenarios. And finally is recording the user interface response, providing an additional interface for learning. So whether it's QI or multiple choice. So simply put, this is more like a system where it's a little bit more open. We'll be asking them a question, the employee a question, and then we'll see how they answer it. And finally, you have kind of like storyline and pathways. Really is, in practical terms, think about the path that an employee will take to complete a specific task. Because these environments are replicas of the real world, we're looking at how much time they're spending, which route they're taking, and whether they're being optimal or not. Now that's a little bit about the analytics. Alicia, if we can move on to the next one, please. Now, how to get the most out of your VR training program. So this carries over into systems that sit outside of VR, like your typical learning management system. Because most of our companies usually have thousands of employees, having all of this data outside or just within the VR system can be cumbersome. Most of our clients will integrate information. And all of this data that we mentioned earlier will be synced to their LMS so that there is no loss of data. Another thing that we kind of like adding that to help get the most out of these training systems is narration and just general accessibility. So whenever an employee is going through this content, if we are training them, there's usually a voiceover explaining what to do and a highlight system, kind of like basically giving a visual cue of what the trainee should be doing next. The great thing about these two is that they can be turned on and off. So whenever we have audio cues telling us what to do and highlights telling us what to do next, we're training our team members. But when we turn these off, then we're evaluating them. And we're looking at things like how are they engaging with this content now that they don't have a voice telling them what to do and a highlight describing what they should be interacting with next. And finally, we have just a quick note on 360 video and CG. So 360 video is something that's filmed with a 360 camera. CG means computer generated. It means that all the content has been created in 3D. The use case for 360 is more around soft skill training because the hazard identification training, and I'll touch upon that a little bit further after when we get to some of the use cases. While CG is more hard skill training. So any type of mechanical work, maintenance and repair, electrical, those are usually best done in CG. And we can go to the next, Alicia, please. Thank you. And measuring the results of a VR training program is also very important. So now that we have talked about the information and the things that we can track, how we track it, and how we link it back, it's good to understand how do we see the effectiveness of it, right? And a great way to do it is in a couple of ways. So we're looking at it on an individual training session. For example, Ronnie went through this training. It took him this long to complete it. This is the things that he did right. This is where he made mistakes. Like he forgot to do his safety checklist before he went in the field, or he did a wrong lockout tagout procedure. So that's all on me. Or I found a certain amount of hazards and I missed the rest. But where things get interesting is that, especially with larger data sets, you can see how A, this employee has done over time, but B, how the company is doing overall. And that's where you can get the most insights around this, because you can see that in 5,000 people, maybe a large amount of them are missing a specific, let's say, hazard, or they're making the same mistakes. And that's when you understand that, okay, this acts as training, but it also helps us gain insights around areas that need improvement in our training overall. Because VR is not, or AR, they're not really replacing existing systems, they're more of the time enhancing them. And I think that's what really helps with quantifying ROI as we look at some of the use cases that come up. Teresa, on to the next, please. Oh, and this is just a footnote. One thing that's really important as well is to have a system that manages the VR and AR infrastructure. Most of you are familiar with device management systems for your mobile devices or laptops that the company uses. This is a very similar system that works for AR and VR devices. What it allows us and your IT team to do is basically control user rights on the devices, lock them to specific applications, and it also gives us, as the software developer, the ability to push content and updates onto the devices whenever that's required. And we can go on to the next. Now, a great use case here of 360 stereoscopic interactive content is with Toyota Manufacturing. We're working with our plants in Canada, but also in the States. Their main challenge was that it took employees a long time to complete their training, about a day. Also, it was risky because they were in a live manufacturing environment. So what we were able to do was we were able to greatly reduce the amount of space that is required for training, cut down the orientation time from a full day to 30 minutes, and recently even eliminated travel between two plants because they had this for a single plant. And then all the people from the other plant had to travel to it, and they would lose more than a day in just meeting their safety training compliance standards. So now it's a small dojo that's under 500 square feet where they can train literally thousands of people over a year with just 10 headsets. So that cuts down in time that they lose in productivity, as well as money spent in travel, especially with with trucks and buses becoming more limited now due to COVID. The amount of people that they can shift from plant to plant also is more limited. And on to the next, please. Finally, we have a CG example here for Avangrid Renewables, part of Iberdrola. And here, the goal was to eliminate risk in electrical training. The main takeaway here was that the training effectiveness was increased by 65%, and the onboarding time was more than doubled. So right now, we're working with hundreds of their technicians throughout North America in training them on how to do maintenance repair on turbines. And the next projects we're working with them on are actually substation walkthroughs and multimeter usage. And on to the next, please. And this brings me to the end of the presentation, almost a little bit sooner, I believe. This will hopefully give us some time to have a little bit more conversation. Pierluigi, I will pass this on to you. And thank you for your time earlier today, everyone.
Thank you so much, Ronnie. At this point, I would ask anybody that has any questions, please to send it to the Q&A coordinator that you will see in the panelist. We already received some questions. We'll start with those, and feel free to add more as we go. The first question for you, Ronnie, is how do you deploy this solution in this pandemic environment where there are restrictions of traveling internationally and even nationally sometimes?
Very good question. Thank you. So it depends on the content that's being created. When it comes to CG, so 3D content, there is no limitation in deployment because all the content is created in-house in our offices here. And then all we have to do is basically ship the devices that our clients will have decentralized. So they will have a device per office, or some of them will ship it directly to the employees' homes. And they will just go from one to the next. Now, in terms of hygiene and infection control, we have modified face covers. We provide special wipes. And the ones that have a training dojo, they actually have custom headset UVC disinfection machines that basically eliminate all germs from it before and after use of each employee. The only area where we've seen a bit of a challenge when it comes to content creation due to travel restrictions is whenever we had to go on site to film from 360 videos, that's become more limited. Like we had a recent deployment with Toyota Mississippi, motor manufacturing Mississippi, and we couldn't send our specialists here, like our own video team. So in that case, we had to hire a local US team to do all the filming. So it does create a little bit of an increase in cost for us, but it does whenever we have to hire a team to film for 360 internationally. But whenever it's computer generated graphics, it really hasn't had much of an impact on our ability to deploy and deliver this content.
Thank you. Thank you for answering the question, Ronnie. And on the same line of deployment, is this solution, can this be deployed in multiple use cases, as you were mentioning, but can this be deployed also in the field other than just in an office? And the example that this person is asking for is an example on a factory floor where you have employees potentially in a factory floor and they have to learn about specific tasks there.
It can. Well, it depends on the technology that we're discussing. So if it's augmented reality, absolutely. The devices are also intrinsically safe so that they can work in any type of sensitive environment. They're completely hands-free. They'll just mount it to a hard hat. They're not intrusive because it's basically something you can lift on and off and help help your employee go through a standard process. For VR, I would say that you still, and VR training specifically, I'd say you need a little bit of a safe space where they can do it. As long as they have, let's say, 2 feet by 2 feet around them or 3 feet by 3 feet around them, and that this person cannot see them while they're getting their training, then they should be safe. But again, you need to be mindful with VR that the person is fully immersed in that environment and they can't see anything outside of what they're doing. So, you got to be careful with where you set it up.
Makes sense. Yes, totally. Another question, again, about international markets. Go about deploying your solution in an international market. Do you usually go directly, or do you use a local partner or channel or distributor?
So currently, we don't have a distributor or a channel partnership in place for international sales. We usually have historically sold directly to our international clients, but there have been cases where larger groups like Intertech, for example, or like large enterprise training groups have hired us to provide the infrastructure to deliver the training content that they would normally create for these clients. Like, because a lot of clients have existing training providers who don't have VR experience, but they have a lot of subject matter expertise, in which case we would just simply serve as their technology delivery wing.
Okay, thank you. Question about, you mentioned Toyota as one of your clients, and I can see a gazillion different use cases that you probably went through with them. But the question from the audience is, what was your entry point at Toyota? How did you, crack that nut?
Oh, it's a good question, a funny question too. So Toyota came to us when the company was in its infancy. I remember when they came to us to visit our old offices, they had more procurement people in that meeting than we had like all team members. Funny enough, Toyota actually came to us. So we weren't the ones to go to them. But the way we managed to expand and grow with them internationally actually came to taking like a more strategic approach with them. So when we started with their concept was very simple back then. They just wanted something to look at a video in 360 with just normal operations, and then they wanted to look at the video with hazard highlights applied to it. But what we did is we decided to go one step further, and we decided to make it more interactive for our team. So for their team. So now what they could do is they could use the laser pointer and spot these hazards. So that's how we were able to grow with them, was to take their initial concept and kind of expand upon them. And now we're integrated into their learning management system, and we're doing, I don't know, so many projects simultaneously. So I think it was important for us to not just deliver what they thought they wanted, but to deliver something that was what we thought would give the most value for them.
Interesting. Thank you for answering the question. The other question was, how many training programs, courses did Toyota utilize your solution for? So like, did you do multiple training solutions and training courses with them?
Yeah, we did. And we still are. Basically, we initially started with the safety team, and they had about 6 modules around different areas of the plant, where they could basically do orientation and hazard identification training. And then we expanded upon it to include groups like conveyance and other departments, where we went from simple, hazard spotting to things like much more interactive scenarios, like interacting with electrical work, conveyance training on, when the vehicles can turn, critical thinking. So we've expanded into a few dozen different types of trainings and modules from the initial ones.
Thank you. Another question that I got from the audience is about interaction between users while they're actually doing the training. So can 2 trainees interact with each other while they are training, especially if they are remote?
They can, but we haven't set up the system that way, because what it does is, practically speaking, it just adds too many data points for us to be able to track the individual responses to it. What we've had in the past is like we've had a supervisor be kind of like hidden online in the scene to see how the employee is doing. But we also found that whenever you're training 2, 3, 4,000 people, you almost want it to be self-sufficient, so that somebody can go in there, do their whole training, and then you can see how they did by looking at the analytics. So you don't have them both sharing the same environment, because it adds too many variables and cost, while the result kind of becomes a little bit more clouded. So we like to keep it a little bit more streamlined. So it's like doing a test or doing your training on your computer, right? You don't want another person to be there with you. You get the information you need from the data that you gather while they're doing all of these.
Okay, thank you. You were mentioning about the hardware and the fact that your solution is really more of a platform where you can use multiple hardware and you can do like advanced augmented reality as well as virtual reality. What type of hardware can you use, and are you compatible with things like the Oculus as an example, or can you give us a couple of examples of what different type of hardware that would work with your solution?
Very good question. So so there's 2 parts to it. So one is when it comes to VR. With VR, we've initially mainly focused on developing our SDK and our software to work with the Oculus Quest. So we are standalone first. So having extremely well optimized, very realistic visuals. So anything you see in our marketing or in our videos that you saw earlier, everything is running on a standalone device on the Quest. We have recently upgraded our SDK OpenXR. So what that allows us to do now is basically have it available on any type of VR headset for most of the stuff that we deliver. This way you're stuck to a single piece of hardware, but usually it's being developed for the Oculus Quest first. Secondly, moving on to augmented reality. Here we're a little bit more limited. All our applications have really been developed for a device called RealWear. The reason we chose them was because they had really to work with SDK, but also they were the only device out there that was intrinsically safe. For a lot of our clients who are in the energy utility space, that was very important, as well as it working really well with voice activation and being hands-free. Like, if you look at like something like the HoloLens, you can't take that into a mine, you can't take that into a working factory because it's very dangerous. The thing can shatter and hurt somebody. While the RealWear is honestly like a much more simple piece of hardware that costs less, but it's also a lot more rugged, and that also makes it a lot more safe. So those are like the 2 areas. So we work in AR with the RealWear, we work with VR with the Quest and other devices with the OpenXR.
Thank you, Ronnie. And actually, the next question is a very good follow-up to this one, because it was about the industrial field. So from what, from all the sectors that you've been working on, where do you see the most demand for your solution? Is it one particular, or is it more of an enterprise play that it kind of goes across all the sectors?
It's hard to tell, to be frank with you. So for us, mostly it's been in the utility energy sector, and then automotive has been our second vertical. But I don't know if that's just random chance and luck, or just because what happens is like the more you have to showcase for a specific industry, the easier it is to acquire. So there's a little bit of a snowball effect in that. I believe that the applications can carry over across multiple industries, but the most adoption we've seen from a practical sense has been from utility energy providers and automotive.
Okay. And you mentioned basically your market is pretty much worldwide. Really, it can be adapted easily from a language perspective and from a localization perspective to many different markets, right?
That's correct. So some of our clients will have this in multiple languages, from Chinese, German, English. A lot of the government stuff we do here is English and French. So it's easy to localize the language requirements, because the applications a lot of the time are custom. So it's easy for us to account for the language changes.
Okay. Thank you. At this point, I'd just like to advise that we have time for a couple of more questions. So feel free to send us more questions if you want, and then we're gonna wrap up. In the meantime, I'll have another one from the audience about analytics. Do you provide analytics on how your system is being used?
Absolutely. So we have two types of analytics. One is around performance and uptime, as you would see with most types of software. But on top of that, you have analytics on user behavior, right? So we're able, like I mentioned earlier, you're able to see things like how long it's taking them to complete modules, what type of workflow they're taking. So we can really measure anything. Sometimes we can measure too much, so it's kind of been counterintuitive. Sometimes our biggest focus have been on understanding from our clients what they want to measure the most. And all of these analytics we use XAPI integration to link back to most modern LMSs. We're working to get SCORM working soon, but that's been a little bit more challenging for us. So we have had trouble integrating with the older LMSs, but all the new ones, we've had no trouble integrating our analytics directly to the existing LMS.
Thank you, Ronnie. So the last question I have from the participants, from the attendees, in terms of size of projects, is there any limit to the amount of information that you can turn into a training session for a VR headset? Like, is there any limitation that you would usually advise your clients, or it's pretty much any type of content, any type of media?
That's a really good question. This one I can spend like 10 minutes talking about.
It's okay.
So I would say, yes, of course. There are definitely limitations, but some of them really come down to the use case and the delivery vehicle you choose. Like practically speaking, you can deliver things in two ways when it comes to VR. One is going to be a 360 video, and the other one is going to be a 3D environment. Now, with the 360 video, the limitation is that you can only use a laser pointer and you can only select options. You can say yes, no. So your interaction with it is very limited. So that's your big limitation there. The great thing about it, though, is that you are looking at a real view of what the world looks like when that's being recorded in 3D. Then you go into CG, computer-generated graphics. Here, things open up more when it comes to the interaction side of things, because now you can pick up tools, you can do all these things in a virtual environment. But now the limitation is, practically speaking, is the scale of a 3D environment that you can have at any one point. Like our latest project was very challenging, because what we had to do is we basically had to make in CG a replica of a large substation. And so that the user can go through it in a safe way, and they can see how the power will run, and they can understand how all these systems work. But it was very challenging to deliver from a technology perspective, because now we have an extremely large, complicated 3D environment that needs to run very smoothly on a standalone VR headset. So now the challenge is scale of environment is the challenge, and how realistic it looks is a big challenge in CG with current standalone devices. So those I would say like it's just the big takeaway would be like 360 things look really like the real world, but how you interact with them is very limited. CG interaction is like the real world, but how they look is not very realistic, and you're limited to the size and scale of that world.
Okay, so I see it really depends also on the type of training that you're developing, whether you're choosing one or the other, I guess.
Correct. So usually you look at it this way. You look at it, if it's kind of like soft skill training, you're doing 360. If it's hard skill, hands based, and you want to build motor and reflexes, then it's going to be, that's the way kind of like to look at it high level.
Thank you. Thank you, Ronnie. Very insightful information. Thank you again, Ronnie, for your presentation on VR Vision today. We really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone for joining today's session. We will be sending a follow-up email shortly with more content and some additional information. Thanks again, and everyone have a nice day.
Thank you, everyone.